All right, welcome. Try it again. Unmuted. Welcome to Graph Guy. Again, I'm Clark Ritchie, and we're going to jump right into it with today's special guest, Steve Stone. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
I appreciate it, Clark. Look forward to it.
This is exciting. So, Steve, for those of our viewers who may not be familiar with you and your career, why don't you give us a little bit of a background about yourself and your career? I know you've done some really cool stuff, so enlighten us if you would.
Okay. I started in the technology industry about 38 years ago as a systems engineer writing COBOL code and assembler. I moved into consulting with Ernst& Young and eventually joined company Lowe's, which was based in my hometown of North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. I was at Lowe's for about 18 years, and we grew from about 3.5 billion in revenue to nearly 50 billion in revenue during that time. I left in 2010, and during that period of time, I served as CIO for the final 8 years I was at Lowe's. I spent a couple of years at MicroStrategy, founding and running their cloud business unit. But I found I really missed retail. I like retail, so I moved to L Brands as their CIO and worked there for about 5 years before I retired in 2017. And since retiring, I wrote a book on digital transformation, guaranteed to cure insomnia if you're having problems sleeping. And I also work as an advisor for several technology companies.
Wow, that is quite a run. And writing a book while retired doesn't sound super retired. And other people have done that. And that is a ton of work. So, wow,
It was
that
definitely more than I thought it was going to be.
yeah, yeah. Everything worth doing seems to always be harder than you'd like it to be, right? Oh man. So that's cool. So obviously here on Graph Guy, we like to talk about graph, and I know you and I met while you were working at L Brands, and you guys did a ton of analytics and things over there. So, what do you think are some of the, or what? Let me start a little more generally. What is it that intrigues you about graph databases and graph analytics at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I found in my career, I've tried so many damn databases, and there's no real single answer to it. I mean, relational databases are the workhorse of industry now. They're the foundation for most of our transactional systems. I've worked with columnar and NoSQL databases, and they're great for their flexibility. I think Graph really over the last decade has came out and definitely grown in popularity because it focuses on a set of use cases that are really specific to relationships. And until you really think about relationships and how you reflect relationships in data, you really don't understand how complex that is. I mean, I always, you and I have talked before. It's funny that relational databases do a crappy job of dealing with relationships.
Right.
So I've just found that it's fascinating some of the things you can do with graph to solve problems that we've had for years and years and years.
Yeah, right. It is. Yeah, it is always funny that, like you said, that relational database is not good for relationships. Um, it's just sort of mind boggling, but who knew back then, right?
Yeah,
Back then they were fantastic.
yeah.
50 years ago, and they were invent more than that now.
Compared to a VSAM file, it was a quantum leap.
Right? Yeah, it was there and mumps and everything else. Yeah, it was quite the step forward. So. Most of your background, a lot of your background is in the retail space. Um, it seems to me, and I'm not an expert in retail by any sense of imagination, other than buying a bunch of stuff. That especially like these days, people talk about you know you can't go anywhere. You can't go anywhere these days. But when you could go anywhere or to talk to
Yep.
people, people always want to, oh, like, all Facebook and social media, and my smart speakers are always listening to me. So when I say something, like I get ads and so forth, and people seem to feel like there's a sense that those relationships, those connections between things I say or do in one place, really tie together super easily and are used by retail all the time. But I think, and you tell me, I feel like for most actual retail, right? Because Facebook isn't retail. Amazon isn't traditional retail by any sense either. Most retailers really don't have that ability right now, do they, to really connect all of those dots of customers and transactions and social media and the feedback like into a single consolidated picture, do they?
No, you'd be surprised. We've talked about this whole notion of single view of the customer and customer 360 for decades in retail. And we invested a ton of money both at Lowe's and at L Brands around that. But it's really elusive. And part of that is the fact that data is always changing. It isn't, you're not dealing with one set of data that never changes. I mean, you have different systems that you're bringing in, you have different channels that have emerged. I mean, there was no online channel back in the mid 90s. And now when you think about that intersection between customer, product, promotion, location, channel, social media, I mean, so much of the product today is bought through the active influencers. And yeah, that's something my kids really tell me a lot about. And I'm like, well, I don't know that I buy my car because I see somebody on TikTok doing a dance, but it's amazing the interplay between social media and what people are buying. So those are complex relationships, and you try to think about how would I model that in a row and a column, and it isn't pretty. I don't know how you do it. So I think that's one of those cases where graph just provides an amazing opportunity to go out and understand what's going on and what influences what. We've talked about advertising efficiency and promotional effectiveness in retail for years, and I will tell you, in most cases, we're throwing something against the wall and hoping it sticks.
Right.
We just don't know until we try it. So there's a whole test and learn mentality in retail, and graph gives us another way, and I think a much more predictable and science-based way of understanding what customers are doing.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said there. That's great. So a couple of things I think really interest me. So one, and so you've been CIO at Fortune 200 companies. You've run much larger so data shops than I certainly have. So I want you to validate. If you can. If I'm wrong, please say so. But the statement for me, because I come at it from one perspective, and I know this statement can be upsetting or controversial to some people, but you really touched upon it there. So sure, you said it can be really difficult to model all those relationships in a relational database, and I've heard people say, well, come on, I can do 4 and 5 hop joins, and then I could do star tables and other joins, and I could absolutely do that. But in my experience, that just isn't really true at scale. Have you seen that be the case, or am I just looking at this the wrong way? Have people really been able to solve that at scale in relational databases?
You can solve it if you're willing to wait. And as they always say, good things come to those who wait. So if you want to run a set of queries and build derived tables and then do derivations of derivations, then yeah, you can solve anything. I mean, the problem is it's not scalable. The fact is, I don't want to run queries upon queries upon queries to get an answer. I mean, I can write a correlated subquery with unions in it, something the CIOs probably shouldn't admit to, but I can do that. And I will tell you, it takes forever to get it right. You got to index just absolutely correctly, and there's only a few people that can do it. With graph, it's a much more natural way to think about data. I mean, who thinks about data as I've got to write a foreign key to this place and another foreign key to that place, and I now have 20 tables that I'm going to join together, and then from that result set I'm going to get. That's not how people think.
Right. Don't think. How do I denormalize this? How do I normalize this into third or fourth normal form? Like, no one thinks that way.
No, I mean, so for transactional processing, relational databases are great, but when you get into this type of complex data, and you brought up a great example with, I mean, do you think Facebook and Amazon are using a relational database to drive all their graphs? I mean, it's not happening. They're using data constructs that allow them to quickly react to changes, and that's where I think the industry's heading. I mean, it's not to say that graph's going to go out and replace relational for all the transactional systems. Maybe that'll eventually happen, but it's not. I don't think it's the driver. But I think there's certain sets of analytics. I mean, we saw with the pandemic, contact tracing is a natural graph problem, and people were trying to solve it with conventional means. And we saw how well that worked.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you have enough time, if you can get there, right? But, like,
Yeah.
even in this age of cloud computing, people, oh, I'll throw more computing resources at it. Those resources still cost money, right? And time. They're not free. And business moves faster and faster these days than ever before, right? You can't. I mean, I'm sure you couldn't go into a boardroom and tell the CEO, like, oh, we can have the answer to that question in 6 days or 7 days. That's not acceptable anymore. People want answers in minutes or less, because that's the speed of business these days. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I want to actually circle back to something interesting you said a moment ago about, like, I don't buy a car by looking at influencers, and I'm with you. I'm not that big into social media, but and I'm not a marketing or salesperson certainly, but I definitely have noticed the trends. I suspect you have as well, and it's really been growing away from traditional advertising, which obviously still exists, but product placement is becoming the new key advertising. Right? It's those key shots in the movie or the TV show of the
Yep.
car, or the what are they drinking, whatever, and that is more and more becoming so prevalent, right? And so I have to imagine, and not being a marketing person, but to figure out what movie or TV show, whatever, do I want to place my product in, and you've got to understand, right, who is watching it and how long, and all this connected information. Then to understand, like, is that driving sales? That's such a web of information. I just don't see how you could do a good job with that without graph.
I don't either. I mean, when you're doing a traditional promotion, so you run a what we used to call a tab in a newspaper. You know the date that the tab dropped. You could look at your sales before. You could look at your sales after and see if there was an impact, because you know what products were in the tab. You knew, uh, all those aspects. When you get into what you just described, product placement and understanding the viewership and what demographic is driven by what they watch, and or sorry, the demographic doesn't drive it, but certain demographics that take their watch movies a certain way, or streaming services, and you try to think about how you link all that together. I can't think of a good way to do it other than graph, because it is all about the relationships, and understanding then I've done these things, I've put my product out in front of people. Am I seeing a change in behavior? Imagine trying to do that, trying to bring it all into rows and columns. I just can't. I
Yeah.
can't figure that out. So
Right.
yeah, I agree. With today's way of marketing and getting product out to the masses, I can't see a company really being successful without thinking of it in terms of a network or a graph.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think we're both very much on the same page. That, again, not for everything. I'm a big believer in using the right tool for the right problem, and so graph
Yep.
is great for a lot of things. It's not good for some other things. Some things should be columnar databases or document databases or
Yep.
relational or some combination, oftentimes. But yeah, there's a huge, except I think particularly in the evolving retail space, area for graph. So I kind of want to pivot from for the back half of this conversation, particularly to it, and draw upon your experience as a a prominent CIO in this space, and talk about graph adoption in the business. And I want to do this from, I think, two different angles at least. So I've obviously spent a good portion of my career, in one way or another, selling technologies into the enterprise. So if I'm trying to, and this isn't particular to graph, right? I think this is a problem for any new technology, right? You want to bring to the enterprise, particularly a large scale enterprise, like an L Brands or a Lowe's, right?
Hmm.
So if I want to talk to you as a CIO or a CTO, and I'm bringing a technology, particularly a data oriented technology, like a new database, I've always seen from my side of the table there's a lot of resistance to that change. And I understand that. You've got investments and so on. But from your point of view, what is the best way to approach someone at the executive level with the new type of data technology that absolutely can provide some more benefits, but clearly there's lots of businesses right now that are doing well without it.
Well, I think the biggest thing is addressing their pain point. Where are they having pain? Where are they not getting the results they want, or where are they having to perform Herculean efforts to make things work? I mean, as we said, you can make relational or any data structure for that matter do what you want it to do if you're willing to invest enough time and energy and resource. So if I can go in and say, look, what you're doing now, we can simplify, we can provide you better responses, we can provide you all of the functionality at a lot less effort, then you get my attention. When you came to me at L Brands and we started working together, we had a massive investment in Teradata, which is at the time the state of the art in terms of data warehousing. And we could get by, we were doing some things, but when we really tried to look across our customers, across the various brands, we had 5 different brands at the time, and understand the demographic interlace between those customers and each of those brands, and were the customers moving up the continuum in terms of products that we thought they were. We couldn't answer that question, not in the time frames the business wanted to know. And that's where Graph came in, and it really played a huge role in being able to unify that data in a way and look at it in a way that we had never really thought about looking at it before. And I think that was probably the biggest aha for me when working with you guys at L Brands was, wow, that's how our customers shopping us. I mean, we hadn't seen that. And to be quite honest, relational databases, because they require you to understand the structure of the data is not a great vehicle for what I would call discovery or a hypothesis-free query. Graph, on the other hand, is. You can visually look at a graph, and you've shown me things before where it's like, that just doesn't look right. Why is it that way? And it shows you patterns and things that you would have never seen in a relational structure. So I'm a big fan for what I've seen, and think that, again, I think there's a ton of use cases that we're just scratching the surface on right now.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and I wanted to kind of just dive into a little bit of something you said there, because it actually resonated with something I heard with a customer yesterday that I think is important to call out here. And I think, and actually I see this a lot when I talk to people who aren't super familiar with graph database. Maybe they have some knowledge, of them. They immediately in their head, they have a visual picture, right? They see circles and lines, and that's great, right? Because one, it validates that, yes, that's how we think about data more naturally. Right? Again, from as an exercise to anyone's watching, go to someone who really deeply understands any kind of a problem domain, whether it's a business or a hobby or something, and take them to a whiteboard and give them a mark and ask them to explain that to you. They're, for the most part, going to draw circles and lines with words in them, because that's just kind of how we think and relate to and structure data in our heads. But I think that picture just sticks to people. And I've actually heard people say many times, oh, a graphical database. No, it's not a graphical database. I'm not even sure what that would be, but that's interesting. And actually I heard it yesterday from the customer. I think to some degree in this space, there is a notion that that's the only information I can get out of the graph is that picture, right? And I heard it said well, but what do I do with it? I can't operationalize that picture. I need data. I need raw data coming out of this that I can do something with. And that's a misconception, right? Because yes, those pictures can be really important, particularly when you're doing that exploration you talked about. Yep. Our ability as humans to visually identify patterns very quickly, particularly if we're well versed in that data space. But yes, you absolutely can pull out raw data points to drive analytics, to build dashboards and things, just as if you were running, relational or anything else, right? And I feel like maybe those in the industry have done a poor job at communicating. We maybe become so enamored of those fancy little pictures with the lines
Yep.
and the circles. And for whatever reason, I know people love to have them all force directed. We talked about this a couple of shows ago. And force directed drives me nuts. But yeah, I think we need to, in the industry, we need to do a better job of kind of really address, because I think that's a hurdle that we have that to get over. So, staying on with the original topic of this little digression, I agree with you definitely. Yeah, like showing value. Like, what is a pain point if you're a CIO that I can address? But there's always, and I feel like this is such a challenge in the data space, right? Because you've, like I said, you invested in Teradata, you've invested in Oracle, and so on. And now I come in and I'm showing you a new graph database, right? Or a graph database, and showing you all these great things you can do. One of the things I always hear from people is, well, that might be great, but like, I've got 4 or 5 data sources so let's say I'm drawing from 4 or 5 data sources or I've shown you how to solve your fraud problem or your customer 360 problem. I pulled from maybe a Teradata and an Oracle and SQL Server or whatever it might be into this graph database to come up with that fraud analysis or that customer 360. And the first thing you always seem to hear from either the CIO shop or somewhere down the IT line is, well, you're just duplicating my data now everywhere, right? So now my costs are going up. I have to get another database. I've got more storage costs. I've got training costs. And really, if I look at all of those extra costs, I'm not saving anything because I could get to that answer another way if I really wanted to. And that can be a real challenge. Those are valid concerns. So on your side, like how do you, because as a CIO, it really becomes, you didn't always just have, one particular database, whatever, so you must be dealing with these kinds of things. So how do you think about that and deal with those kinds of infrastructure challenges?
Yeah, it's a very real challenge. We tried to, you tried to rationalize the number of different databases that you have. You try to rationalize, at some point in time, you find that there's more query tools in your organization than you really knew there were going to be. I woke up one day at L Brands with 90,000 access databases on shared drives. So I'm like, where the hell did that come from?
Wow.
So it really gets back to the problems you're trying to solve. And you think about you brought up a point a minute ago around the whole idea of customer 360, and then we talked about hypothesis free query. When you try to detect a community, and you think about what graph does, there are multiple algorithms in graph that can detect communities or find similarities to help you build clusters or find patterns or trends that you weren't seeing in your data. And you don't have to go out knowing exactly what it is you're going to find. The algorithm does that for you. That's a natural way to bridge into things like data science and AI and machine learning. So I guess kind of anchoring back to that, why would people want to do that? Well, it's giving you capabilities you don't currently have. And you and I have talked before about this whole notion of pipelines and the ability for me to take data out of existing data structures, run it through, apply the analytics to it, and then move that data back into a repository that people are more accustomed to hitting with Tableau or Power BI or something like that. I think that there's a huge market for that. If I don't want to persist data, I don't want to persist my customer in 20 different places, then great, I understand that. But I can't apply a graph algorithm to a relational structure. And the relational structures, to be quite honest, aren't conducive to the type of analytics I'm wanting to do. So I think you've got to be open to different strokes for different folks. You're going to have a way to use your data in different forms. The worst thing you can do is try to fit a square peg into a round hole. I can't really turn a relational database into a document store. It's not a good use of the relational database. relational databases aren't great for streaming. There's obviously better data structures for that. By the same token, I think when I look at these types of complex linked data, you're not going to find a better way to find what you're trying to find than graph and graph algorithms. So I think it really gets back to a broader architecture and data management issue that CIOs are going to have to face, which is, it's not one tool, it's a set of tools and solutions that provide answers to all my questions.
Yeah, and I know we're running really short on time here, and you have to go. But I think one last thought that I want to make and get your opinion on is I definitely agree with what you just said, and I feel like now maybe more than ever in recent history, business is changing so fast. So yes, you've got a business, particularly of a certain size, and it becomes hard to change things because there's sunk costs and investments in training and infrastructure and so on. But at the same time, there are young, small companies that are starting up and doing things very rapidly. And I mean, that's something that's always been the case, but now you have these mega companies like Amazon. And really, if you think about Amazon, about Facebook, they're all about the data. Right? So Amazon is a healthcare company now, right? A pharmaceutical company,
Yep.
And so on. Probably getting into healthcare. They're getting back into physical stores. Why? It's because they have the data. And I feel like if, as mid to large size companies, if we don't take those risks in a sensible way, right, and make those changes, these larger companies who have gotten really good at managing and leveraging data, they're going to come knocking on your door and do really, really bad things to your business. And I know you've seen some of that.
Yeah, if you think Amazon's not a competitor and you're in any industry right now, you're crazy. You've got to look at that. And the thing that Amazon does that I've always been amazed with, and I want other companies to really be able to think about that, was when they think about their business adjacencies, they're not locked into any particular channel. They look at data and say, from that data, can I build an adjacency into that particular space? I mean, who would have thought the Amazon Echoes and Dots and things like that would have came from the fact that, we've got this set of data and these certain processing capabilities. Let's apply that to a smart speaker.
Right. And I mean, if I recall, when you were still at L Brands, I believe, and Victoria's Secret was there, and they've had their shows up and downs. But if I, for those who aren't aware, Columbus is basically the area where Victoria's Secret is headquartered. Yep. Amazon moved in with a distribution center and 1 hour delivery on lingerie to directly attack them because they had the data and they understood the market and saw an opportunity. So,
yep,
they're doing it.
Well, and the funny thing is, retailers, if they would wake up, would realize that they have Amazon outflanked in terms of location.
Right.
But those locations can't just be for people walking in the front door of the store. They have to be fulfillment centers that can move move product to the customer's home. I mean, I used to have that discussion at L Brands. We've got a customer in California wanting our product, and we ship it out of Columbus, Ohio. We have a store less than a mile away that has the exact same product. Why can't we get it to them quicker?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be able to use your resources.
Like Target and Walmart have done a really good job with that, like pivoting a little bit.
Target's been amazing. They shipped during the pandemic, almost 90% of their product came out of the stores.
Yep.
I mean, that inventory would have sat idle otherwise.
Yep.
So I agree.
Yeah, we could pivot into that and have another conversation. But it's 12:30. I know you've got a hard stop. So thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and look forward to chatting with everyone again soon. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Clark Ritchie, and I'm the Graph Guy.